Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name's Citizen Strife, and this week I get to talk about a game that I completed on my channel a couple of years ago, but realized I never really got around to talking about it at length, that being Illusion of Gaia. Now, Illusion of Gaia is an unofficial part of an unofficial trilogy known as the Blazer Trilogy. The Soul Blazer game, which I talked about a few years back, and Terranigma. Illusion of Gaia was kind of well known as like the most well known and most popular commercially of the three, and follows along with Soul Blazer and the mechanics, but kind of does its own thing and is a lot more story based to a point. Obviously, having a main character that speaks helps because the original character was a silent protagonist. The framing device of Soul Blazer is very thin, admittedly, so Illusion of Gaia tries to at least have some more of a plot. That being of an explorer and his son going to the Tower of Babel, and the father going missing, and Will waking up in the middle of, I want to say South Cape is the town in question, but not having really any memory of what happened of that incident. So he ends up befriending a princess known as Kara, who they kind of just meet up with their friends and then end up going on an adventure to find these mystic statues. So they look for these 6 statues all around the world, and they go to actual mythological sites, other places, based on those settings, fight monsters of those. Will mostly does all the work as the main character, but the other party members follow along, and Kara kind of gains like the love interest role, but there is some stuff that the other characters get to do here and there. So they get their own personalities and they do their own fun things. And I would say the cast is okay for a game that is light on story. I would say it's kind of equivocal to, say, Secret of Mana, how it approached its story, where it's there, but it's not like the important thing. I would say the gameplay is what's important, but the framing device does enough. Really, Illusion of Gaia is a lot of set pieces. You go to a historical site and you learn like a smidge of like the historical reasoning for it. Or at least if an area is like the Great Wall of China or a pyramid, you kind of know what it is. So they go to those places as dungeons, or there's other dungeons like some temples and some other places that aren't really related to historical stuff, but there's a leaning towards world history and some historical and mythological and fantastical places, such as Mu and whatnot. I would say that's what Atlantis was. I know Mu is another variant of that, but for the level that they designed, it's pretty much Atlantis would be my guess. That being said, the gameplay is pretty solid. It follows along with Soul Blazer, but Will can do a couple of things that the Blazer couldn't do. The Blazer was kind of stuck with his sword and some magic spells. Will can at least fight with his flute, but he can also manipulate the environment. Like, if statues are in the way, he can, twist his flute, and then they will, like, be magnetically geared or psychokinetically lured to him so that he can get through it. He can pass gaps, he can run through gaps, he can just slide through holes. Environmental stuff like that does add a little bit of intrigue to, finding the enemies, because really finding the enemies and solving some of the puzzles here and there, it's not as intensive as, say, a Zelda game is. It's mostly just hit a button or a switch or go to a different area, do a thing, and find a, traversal method. Your main goal in any one area is to fight all of the enemies, because you don't really gain levels. You gain stats by defeating all the monsters in a room. So you defeat them, you get an HP, you get attack, you get defense, or you get a skill, or you open up the next area. You're able to save the game in dark spaces, and you're guided by, I believe it's known as Gaia, disembodied head and voice of the planet, who pretty much tells you that a comet of some evil disposition, disaster basically, is going to destroy the planet. So Will's motivation is to do that. So he takes the form every so often of different characters. The Dark Knight Friedan and the, I don't know what you would call it, basically a being of pure energy and light known as Shadow. And they all have their different uses. Again, Will can use the psychokinetic stuff. He can get, traversal powers here and there. Friedan has more attack power and can jump farther and do, basic knight stuff, but he has better reach with his weapons too, so he can, not only attack harder, but do that. Shadow is like late game stuff, so he only really shows up at the final dungeon and the basically the 6th dungeon and then the final Tower of Babel for the boss rush. But it is cool to use him because he's a much faster attacker. He gets to do some fun stuff like avoid damage by kind of going into a pool of energy in the floor. Dipping through the floor is kind of the traversal mechanic of the pyramid to get your way around it. And then he's able to just basically lash out a tentacle whip at enemies with like super fast attacks. So it's cool using him. So it does have some versatility in its system. Like the enemies, they all kind of hit their own strides. Certain enemies are strong, certain enemies are weak. Some fly around, some go spaces, some fight you, some get lured by you, some, are like hidden. Like in the Great Wall of China, they're statues that come to life and then try to stab you or shoot stuff at you. They're cool enemies here and there, and each one usually isn't reused. If too much. Some enemies kind of just stay in the area. You get some fun, cool stuff like, okay, there's a threat to this person's life over here, and then there's some darker stuff in this thing, like a secret gambling ring. It seems unnecessary, but it does flesh out the game more. It does have a tinge of just like unease because it's meant to be lighthearted, but it does, for its credit, it does do some deep ass shit. Some things are not as fun as others. Like some of the late game stuff is a little uncomfortable, even in sprite form, as opposed to, if this was like full motion video or cutscenes today, like I don't know if they'd be able to get away with it with like a normal T rating. But somehow some of the shit they were able to do, they dodged by some censorship or some avoid. Like, it's really, really tough. One of the tamer segments, but just to give you a thought process of it, was Kara and Will basically being at each other's throats as like this catty relationship, because Lily is also Will's friend, but like Kara wants to be Will's friend, even though they're like 14, 15, 16. Like, okay, that's cool, but, it's a little, whatever. But it's fine, I guess, for a love story. I don't really think they have a lot of chemistry, though. They kind of force the issue in a spot where they're stuck on a raft and they have to kind of live to survive. It's not even so much about them growing closer. It's more about Kara not being a weird petulant child and like learning that, okay, if I don't eat, I don't survive, because being on a very small life draft for 20 days is shit. So yeah, so shit like that happens. Obviously, a lot darker stuff happens later on in the game, and again, some of the visuals for the sprite work go pretty damn hard. One of the other things that Illusion of Gaia does well is kind of the bosses. They're distinct, and they don't fuck around. I don't think this game is very good at using invincibility frames, and I don't think Blazer, like Soul Blazer 1, was either. Like, if these enemies potshot you with all their shit, you're gonna be taking damage, and it doesn't matter what part of the game. They balance it out so that you are going to take damage. The only issue I find is that the herbs they give you are finite. You can't buy them. You find them or you get them from the jeweler, and then that's all you get for the rest of the game. You get like maybe 20 or 30, and you hope that you don't die. It's not the hardest game, but if you don't have enough extra lives, or if you use up all your herbs, then, getting to that final boss rush, which is, lo and behold, fighting the enemies over again, just with Shadow, or Dark Gaia themselves as the final boss, or even the secret boss, which you obtain by getting all 50 jewels. The game will hurt. I would say the first boss is kind of this kind of sucks. This guy's no joke. Like the boss arena is riddled with like lasers and fire and all these projectile things, and then you're trying to hit him in certain spots because he doesn't always take damage. Other ones aren't as bad, but then there's a timed one. Like the third boss is a timed one. The fourth one is a boss that you can only hurt it in certain times because he's digging himself under the ground. So it's not like he hurts you that bad, but if you're greedy, he can kill you. I would say the first and second bosses, like up to like the third, first, second, third, and fifth bosses are hard. I would say the desert boss, the Great Wall of China boss, is the weakest, but still annoying, because the game admittedly will hit hard when it has to. So it is a challenge enough that if you like a challenging game, I would say works. And in terms of like the story it's trying to tell with the characters it's trying to tell, I mean, it does kind of speed along through things. It is a 10 to 15 hour game, so don't expect the world out of it in terms of a story or gameplay wise, but it's pretty dang good for the time. And in that kind of tough East, Zelda-ish, Link to the Past kind of way, that similar action RPG kind of thing. If you like the action RPG stuff, Secret of Mana, again, though it doesn't have the same magic system, I appreciate, because Mana's magic system is a bit in hindsight. But again, it's that action-based action-based gameplay with some puzzle elements and a decent enough story and characters to do what it needs to do for the 10 or 15 hours. I liked playing it, and I would definitely recommend it if people haven't played it before. People have some playthroughs here and there online. Obviously, I've got one. But if you haven't played it yourself, I mean, try to find access to it, or even dig out an SNES and play it. There might be a copy somewhere. And I don't think it's a bad game. It certainly is worth the play. But that'll do for today. Nice, quicker game to get through. Just talking about things and doing what needs to be, just good enough. A good enough game sometimes. Speaking of good enough, let's see what we have coming up next. Toilet Bound Hanako-kun in October. I really, really want to talk about that one. X Nordics, Zenshu, and all the way into late November is Vagrant Story. So, still talking my way through a lot of games. I think eventually what's going to happen is I might run out of games to talk about, because there's only going to be so many games that I'm going to be able to play that I haven't already played. So new games maybe won't come out again. So I'm guessing I will stick with maybe anime-based podcasts, but not for a long, long while, to bear that in mind. Or, just stop outright. But I think there's no reason to stop. I just think it's, there's only going to be so many games and only so many subjects, but that's going to be in the far-flung future. So I'm glad I've even gotten this many out. Over 215 or 220, give or take, and I've enjoyed it. Just thinking out loud in my head that someday I'm probably going to run out of games to talk about, but that's for another day. But for now, I'll call it here. Got a nice little quick podcast out of the way, so I'll see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.